You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers and other important people from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island just like you, and I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. Well, so back in May, we spoke with Joseph Ostapiuk about how laboratory testing on the contents of the first 16 of 22 chemical drums recently unearthed at a former Grumman aerospace dumping ground at Bethpage Community Park showed results consistent with what's already known about pollution at the site and what's in store for the future of the area. Well, this week, Joseph was joined by fellow reporter Tracy Tullis on an updated story, reporting about how the New York State Department of Health will conduct a new and expanded health study in Bethpage, more than a decade after an analysis found cancer rates surrounding Grumman's toxic dumping ground did not surpass expected levels. Well, we needed to know more, so thanks to the magic of Zoom, we're joined by Joseph Ostapiuk from Newsday and Newsday.com right now. Hello and welcome to this week's Long Island News.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you guys having me back.
Oh, hey. Our last show was very informative. I could go back and listen to that a bunch of times about, some of the things we talked about. But anyway, new developments, I guess. Maybe tell us more about this health study and what it means.
Sure. So a call for a new health study isn't necessarily new in itself. We've had officials call for it recently, obviously after the discovery of the drums, and there's been attention on this site. But even after the last study, which was released in 2013, there were experts, some advocates, residents who were saying the study wasn't extensive enough. We wanted a larger area that it covered. The previous study done in 2013, we covered around a 19-block area. And as you mentioned, it didn't indicate that cancer levels were higher than expected. But this is a new push. So this new push comes at the state and local levels from, a few elected officials, Jake Blumenkrantz, Steve Rhodes, Supervisor Joseph Saladino. And they essentially wanted the state health department to give another look at their data, especially given that some time has passed. As we know, unfortunately, cancers develop over time. It's not something that's immediate. So they want a new look to see if there's any new trends that are happening, but also to see if we could, get this considered to be a cluster, which we'll go into later if that's really, possible.
Right. Well, and what do you think made it take so long to happen?
Even, after the initial study in 2013, as I mentioned, these calls were made. And the state health department was not really interested in doing it again. They told Newsday that expanding the area might dilute the results. And they said that the results that they have really didn't warrant doing it again. As with anything, and you had mentioned the drums that were found did not leak into the ground. And they were also the same chemicals that were already in the soil and the groundwater anyway. But it did bring a lot of attention to the site. This site, which has been in cleanup for a very long time, if you ask Bethpage residents, an eternity, it brought a new attention to it. It brought, the governor releasing a statement on it shortly after the discovery, the state DEC, basically being thrust to the forefront of things about this cleanup. And then also, obviously, the town being able to say, hey, we told you so, and we want more attention here. So I think there was just a lot of momentum behind this. And I think that, elected officials noticed that and said, we could probably get something here for residents. And this is something that, residents that I spoke with are interested about. When you talk to them, they speak a lot about experiences they've had either with cancers or even anecdotal information about, people in their block that have had cancers. The one thing I'll say is cancer is obviously a leading cause of death. So it's really, really difficult, while I obviously, I hear these stories and it's difficult to really understand the scope of things without a study like this. So that's sort of what the state health department is looking to do now. After receiving a letter from those officials I mentioned, they said they were, basically looking at their options, and then they decided earlier this week to announce officially that they're going to launch a study.
Right. I mean, well, timing would be a big issue here. Someone ingests a particle of something, and it would take 15, 20, sometimes 30
Mhm.
years to see something develop. So when an incident is found like that, oh, hurry up, let's test everybody. And you say, well, wait a minute, dude, you'd have to slow down a little bit. And unless there's a way to detect these minute amounts of some of these bad substances, how can you really tell?
Yeah, I mean, the study itself is going to have, about a decade more of data, which I think is important.
Mm,
As I mentioned, that last study came out in 2013. This data is going to go through 2021, and it's going to have a whole trove of data and it's also going to look at more people, which is important. So, going into the study itself, we don't currently have the exact parameters of it yet. They just told us it's going to be an expanded area. Essentially, they're looking to see where the plume has moved over the past, 10 years or so to sort of draw the boundaries of what they're going to be looking at.
right.
Um, and then they're going to do the study, which is in technical terms called a retrospective observational analysis. And it is sort of what it sounds like. They're going to be looking over state cancer registry data, and analyzing it. The important thing, and the state health department was very careful, in my opinion, to make this declaration pretty early. These types of studies are designed really to see if cancer rates are higher than expected. Obviously, in any area, there's a certain level of cancer that's expected. It's like I said, it's one of the leading causes of deaths. However, this is looking to see if there's in certain areas what we would probably be known as clusters that have rates that are higher than normal, or if the specific cancers are unusual, or if the ages of the individuals are younger. Now, that 2013 study found that rates weren't, more than normal. It did find there were some unusually young cancers,
Mm,
and most of the cancers were not linked to the chemicals that were in question here in Bethpage. And they
mm,
said, while they found some of that information, it wasn't enough to declare it a cluster. And, going back around 20 years, over 500 of these investigations nationwide, there's only been 72 clusters identified in the United States. So not very high, you
right.
know. And then out of those 72, only three of them were linked to a potential exposure. So in other words, they were only able to link three of those that they found of 72, and 72 were only found of 576 to a specific cause.
Mm,
So the state health department was very careful to say, we're not going to be finding a specific cause. The goal of this is to give residents information on what cancers are present here and if these cancers are higher than normal.
mm. And what does that mean to let's just say I have cancer and I'm in
Yeah.
within the area. What does that mean to me?
Yeah, I mean, I actually spoke to a resident for that story that came out on Monday, and he sort of understood. He said, I would want that information because, if I'm going to my doctor, I'm doing checkups, I could say, listen, this type of liver cancer is really prevalent in my area. There's actually a study going on. Can we make sure we have a heads up on this? And
Mm,
it not even necessarily if you're, 60 or 70. If you're
anytime.
noticing cancers are younger and you're 30 or 40, you could say, I know you probably wouldn't check for this.
Right.
Let's make sure we check for this now
Yeah,
so we could,
that's an interesting point that you make. That people go to their doctor and they get a checkup,
Mhm.
but what exactly? It's really not specific. Overall,
Mhm.
hey, you look good. Let me bang your knee, and oh, your leg moves, great. Everything, it seems to be cool. And yet, people can leave there and find out uh,
Mhm.
only weeks later that they've got
Yeah.
some horrendous condition.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, so basically, that's going to give people a flag to say, I. But it
Yeah.
won't affect insurance companies, and it's not going to
No.
affect treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I mean, that next level, which is what you're talking about, which is, medical monitoring and things like that, it does not look like this study is going to accomplish anything like that. But it would give people the opportunity to sort of advocate for themselves, which we know in the medical community is important. You'll be
Yeah.
able to say outright, I think A, B, and C. And especially for younger people, like I said, the 2013 study found that there were cancers in unusually young individuals. Now, a lot of times when you're younger, I mean, I'm 28. You go to the doctor. Doctors don't really expect anything. They said you're going to be fine. You're 28. But if you live in this
Right.
area and they find cancer rates are higher than normal in younger people, it wouldn't be a bad idea just to raise it and say, hey, listen, this is a concern I have,
Right.
and this study would sort of give them that ammo.
Right. Right. It's
Mhm.
well now. Are they? You mentioned that they're going to go through the state records and all that. And the last time we spoke, one of the things you mentioned that I think lit quite a few people up was the idea that they'd been dumping this stuff in open pits
Mhm.
long before we found
Yeah.
55-gallon drums and concrete. And we basically talked,
Mhm.
were they trying to show the populace that they cared? Well,
Mhm.
we're going to wrap it up in a nice package and put it in, and it won't leak into and that makes us look like we're semi-benevolent. It's scary when you think about it. And
Mhm. Yeah.
the breast cancer rate on long, is there any indication that that's higher than the national norm?
I'm not sure specifically about the individual cancer rates on Long Island. I think this is going to be something that is unique in the sense that it's going to give Bethpage residents a sort of hyper local look. As I mentioned, it's not like these studies are done all the time. They're
Right.
time consuming. They require a lot of analysis. So it is sort of a unique, opportunity. Unfortunately, the sort of impetus for it is obviously terrible, toxic dumping that polluted, um, a community and Long Island for decades, and is going to continue to pollute Long Island for a very long time.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately, as the plume continues to move
Yeah.
south on Long Island.
That
Um,
seems to be what we're just driving past. We all know who did this. We all
yeah.
know who's responsible for
Mhm.
it, and yet,
Mhm.
it's kind of Um, but I was
Yeah.
wondering if forensically, like you said,
Yeah.
they've been dumping that stuff for 40 years. Are they going to go back and look through records to that time if they even had them?
Yeah, yeah. So the records that they're going to look at, from what my understanding is, they're going to look at the same records they had in the past study, but then also add newer data. Really, what they're hoping, well, not what they're hoping to find, but what they're keeping their eye out for are trends. So, in other words,
Right.
you're going to have the data that they have previously, and then they're going to have a new trove of around 10 years of data. What that's going to do is allow them to see any sort of blips on the radar over a period of time and be able to draw, assumptions or information from that. I think it's important to note this new study, they said was going to be, done over the next 6 months or so. From what I've seen, it's not particularly long, but I think part of the reason for that is because they have the previous study already. They have sort of the framework there, and they have those findings, and they're just going to be adding on with this newer study. So I think that's an important caveat of this. I don't know if it's the full length in terms of what cancer data they have going back, because I imagine that data gets a little spotty as we go, farther and
Right.
farther back.
Right.
But I think what they're hoping to see is the cancers that developed later, the cancers in people who, had nothing when they did the 2013 study,
Right.
but now they have cancer,
Right.
and they can hopefully see, some links between that and whatever they were looking at previously.
Right. So I can expect it in the not too distant future to see a map with a bunch of red flags on it showing me.
Something like that. I'm looking. I'm still waiting for the map that shows exactly what the borders are going to be, because
Right.
that's been a little bit of a point of contention here. The past study was a 19 block area, pretty much around Bethpage Park, which is what we know is the dumping ground. Now, the Grumman property was much more expansive than Bethpage Park,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
600 acres. But this was sort of obviously the dumping ground. This is where a lot of the chemicals were just essentially put directly into the soil, solvent soaked rags and all other really, really nasty chemicals that are from manufacturing, which they did on Long Island for a very long time,
Hmm.
and was only discovered after the company donated the land to the town that is now Bethpage Community Park. So they're probably going to expand that area. Not sure exactly how it's going to look though. If you're living in Bethpage, not sure if your block will be included or not yet. That's just something, we asked directly, but they're still, fine tuning those details.
Yeah. Yeah. You're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and today we're talking to Joseph Ostapiuk, and a reporter from Newsday and Newsday.com about the latest story involving the New York State Department of Health announcing that they'll conduct a new and expanded health study in Bethpage as a result of the chemical drums found buried this spring in the ground at Bethpage Community Park. One of the things about the study that it just made me stop when, the levels weren't what we expected. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, give us a hint of what you expected, because who picked that number?
Yeah, I think the way that they determine what expected levels are, basically means or averages of cancer rates over periods of time in certain areas. Unfortunately, cancer is definitely, it's unfortunate that obviously pretty much everybody I know, myself included, have
Know
either experienced
somebody.
cancer or know somebody who experienced cancer. So there are expected levels of it. And actually, as life expectancy goes up, cancer rates go up. It's because as people grow older, they get cancer more towards the end of their life. There's a lot of discussion about, how long you screen for cancers, because sometimes the treatment for that actually is more negative than just living with it. And you probably wouldn't even die of the cancer that you receive late in life. But it's something that we're seeing more and more, and we have to have a new understanding about, especially as people, thankfully, live longer lives.
Yeah.
But in Bethpage, the people that I've spoken with talk about it a lot. They talk about who they know who've had cancer, if they've had cancer themselves. And some of them just really want answers. When I initially saw the state health department release, I was thinking there's going to be a lot of residents that are not happy, that they're overtly saying we're not going to this type of study is not designed to find a cause. They're going to be frustrated at that, I thought. But in the residents I spoke with, they were actually really just appreciative of having the information. Like I said, the man I spoke with, and I spoke with a couple others, said that I just want the information. I want to know, for their own personal health. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of Bethpage residents have just sort of settled into the frustration of this site is going to take forever to clean up. It's going to continue to take a very long time to get going, and that I'm not even sure of the word for it. It's just like a level of apathy that things are as they are in Bethpage, and it has been like that for a while. And they don't necessarily have a great deal of confidence that they're going to change. But I think they see this study as, hey, at least we're going to be having something from this. At least we're going to have information about our day-to-day lives, which is what most people want to, have information about, obviously.
Yeah. Well, although what's the end result?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because and it's not just people's personal care. Let's talk about property values. Let's talk about, the community in itself. And what happened to the Love Canal? Actually, I haven't looked at that place since that stuff happened, but I can't imagine that it's a flourishing community now.
It's funny you say that, actually. We were talking about this the other day as we continue to, look at coverage for this site moving forward. And from what we understand, Bethpage property values aren't exactly low right now.
Oh, no.
I mean, if anyone who's listening is looking for homes or things like that, home prices are up. Now, there may be some people who just wouldn't want to live there. That's going to be, that data specifically is going to be difficult to find, but there's so much competition in home buying values. It seems like that overshadows anything, including legacy environmental pollution.
Wow.
But it was something that we were talking about, but it just seems like the market on Long Island, and I'm sure everybody's seen the headlines just of the median values going up.
Oh, yeah.
Bethpage, by and large, is another one of those communities that just home values go up and up.
Yeah. I think there are other factors involved in that. I've talked to some lawmakers about the idea of hedge funds competing with families to buy houses. Those are things that Congress should take care of.
Yeah, my colleague John Lamantia would probably be better to talk about that, but I think it's definitely, it proliferates everywhere. I mean, I'm at the age around when people are buying homes, and getting outbid by a hedge fund company is not exactly an uplifting sort of situation.
No, it's it's wild. Eventually we're not to own anything; we just get to rent. That's really That's a whole,
Mhm.
but that's another story, and I
Yeah,
will.
it is
Maybe I'll
another
take you
story
up
for
on that.
sure.
Um, uh, now, what are the political people saying about this? About the
Yeah. So as I mentioned, politicians had been pushing for this a little bit, and then they said, "Hey, listen, we're probably gonna make a push officially." And we said, "Okay, well, when you do, let us know."
right? We'll be here when you do it.
Yeah, we'll be here. And then they officially wrote the letter to State Health Department. State Health Department says, "Yeah, we got it. We're thinking about it." But the officials I spoke with, Supervisor Joe Saladino, he called it a move in the right direction. Um, he said I'm glad we pushed them to recognize that this needs to be done. They're obviously gonna take their victory lap there. And Assemblyman Jake Blumenkrantz said the study is gonna hopefully, he said, will finally address gaps left by the previous 2013 report, offering a comprehensive look at the health impacts and effectiveness of remediation efforts.
Mm,
And he said that the Bethpage communities endured this past study for far too long. He sees it as an opportunity to expand it and to silence some of the questions that I had mentioned that popped up immediately after that 2013 study was released,
right.
and that they waited a long time for. So he's hoping this is, somewhat of a peace of mind, and we can wipe the slate clean with that 2013 study and say, what did we find here now?
Right, right. So I mean, it's good to see that the state wants to investigate and wants to get answers. What's
Yeah.
disheartening is that it's not going to go anywhere. I'm still in the same condition, but now
Yeah.
I know I'm screwed.
I think,
Right?
yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from there. I mean, that was something that when I first saw it, it's somewhat of, I mean, it's a good thing that the information is going to be there. I'm,
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
obviously, as a journalist, information to me is key, but in terms of actual movement, it's not going to move remediation any closer,
No.
by any means. Um, it's not going to definitively, link a cause to the cancers.
Right.
Um, and is it going to change people's minds about, what they feel like in Bethpage? In other words, if the study comes out and says there's no cluster, is that
Right.
going to change people's opinions? Probably not.
Well, they're going to come out and say, "We know what's
Yeah.
got you." Okay, great. Now what do
Mhm.
I do? Well,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
interesting thing,
I think,
uh,
yeah, I think by and large, the Bethpage community, what they want the most is this park back. They want it cleaned. Um, they want, you know, their concerns about pollution there to be, cooled. But it seems like that's going to take a long time. And if you don't mind, I'll go into what sort of is expected next. I mean, the next phase here, because as last time I was on, we were talking about the 22 drums that were found.
right.
Over the past few weeks, Northrop Grumman's new contractor has been doing scans of the park, of
Right.
both electromagnetic scans and ground penetrating radar scans. We're expecting in mid-September-ish to get information about those scans. In other words, they'll be able to say X number of anomalies were found. We have to investigate.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So that could mean anything. That could mean more drums. It could mean other pieces of construction material. We've seen both at this site. I mean,
Right.
it's a
Right.
heavily industrial area. There's concrete, there's metal, all that stuff buried in there, non-toxic materials. But there also could be more drums.
Mhm.
So those scans are underway. But what's happening sort of on a parallel road to that is the next stage of remediation at Bethpage Community Park, which is called thermal remediation.
Okay.
For a while now, um, there's been wells drilled into the ground at Bethpage Community Park.
Aeration wells, or yeah.
Basically, what's going to happen is they're going to heat up the soil
Hmm.
at Bethpage Community Park, and in a given area where there's a lot of pollutants, and that will essentially bring up the contamination, and then
Hmm.
these wells will capture that contamination. That's the next stage. It's part of the ROD, or the record of decision, from the DEC, which basically says this is how we're going to clean up this park. It's the next stage of this, and the
Wow.
DEC is excited about this. It's a very scientifically technical story, and we are actually, I can give a little bit of sneak peek here. We are looking at that in terms of explaining it
Right.
to residents. But that's the next big stage, and that's going to take months to get going. So they are
That's right.
starting that. The last I was told was around the first week of September. So we're right at the cusp of those being turned on. All
Interesting.
the infrastructure's there, And the next step would be turning that on and getting that process going, but it's not really something you could speed up.
Right.
It's just, it works at its pace because
There
you
you
got to
go.
heat up the ground to really, really deep parts of the ground to hot levels. And then the contaminants come up and then the wells capture them. So that's going to take some time. And then, so it's unfortunately just another step in a process that residents and officials and even experts say is taking way too long.
Yeah.
Um, to go. But that's sort of what people should expect in terms of the slow trudge forward at Bethpage Park.
Yeah. It sounds real science fiction-y, I
It
mean, wow.
is. It is in a lot of ways.
That's actually pretty cool that they can do something like that. And again, depending on the effectiveness, do you have to get all the dirt? you know,
Well, yeah, I mean the town maintains and they've continued to maintain that they want all of the soil pulled up. At a site this large and the
yeah,
contaminants as deep as they are, it's not really something that, first of all, the DEC just said flat out, we're going to continue doing the plan that we set out 4 years ago. Um, so I don't think we're going to see Bethpage Park completely remediated. That's editorializing a little bit, but just in terms of what the DEC has said publicly, they're going to move forward with their remediation. Like I said, the infrastructure is already in there. They're going to heat that up. They feel this is the scientifically best way to handle this,
right.
given the specific types of contaminants that are in the ground. But at the same time, obviously, there's a lawsuit between the town and north of Grumman, and the town's going to continue to say we want we want more.
Yeah,
And that's the balancing act that continues to happen on the backdrop of all of this other stuff, which is the
right,
drums being found and the
right.
health study. It's such a complex sort of legal, scientific, and personal story that continues to play out here, and it's been playing out for a pretty long time.
Well, yeah, and the one constant is that people are dying. That
Yeah.
stays the same.
Mhm.
That's. I mean, I don't know. It seems it's heartbreaking when you think we're going to do the study and everybody's waiting to get the information, and what that means to you is now you know what you're going to die from.
Yeah, I mean, the heartbreaking thing for me is definitely, like when I went to the public meetings when the DEC, the DEC did sit in front of the Bethpage community for, a few hours, answer tough questions,
Oof.
which I think, the community wanted. But they're definitely heartbreaking to talk to the residents afterwards, and they
Yeah,
just feel like they've been here for so long, they've been in the same spot, and they just want movement. And it's really tough because they've been really punching and kicking as hard as they could,
yeah,
but these forces they're going up against are colossal. So
yeah.
it's difficult to get much movement.
You know, well, Joe, I could talk to you for another 5 hours about this stuff,
Same
but
boat.
yeah, it's really interesting. And the things that it leads to, and the other thing, an interesting thing about Medicare seems to work this way. If you're going to a doctor to find out what's wrong with you, they'll pay for that. Once they've figured out what's wrong with you, they're not paying for any more visits.
Mhm.
And I thought,
Mhm.
like, it's just confirming a customer. You've confirmed you got this condition, so now you have to go see the doctor. Oh, by the way, your copays just went through the roof. It's things like that, and then you read a story like this, and I can't imagine the
Mhm.
travails that some of these people have to go through just to get a modicum of health care.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you very much for stopping by. I know half hour goes quick, but boom. All right. Well, my guest today has been Joseph Ostapiuk and from Newsday and Newsday.com. Again, can't thank you enough for. I know you're busy, and hey, keep looking at this stuff because we're going to keep asking you what's going on. You're
Sure.
our,
I'll be happy to be on next time. I
you're
appreciate it,
you're
Bill.
you're our pipeline for this kind of all this information. But the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're right here every Friday on the radio at 3 p.m. on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.